Tens of thousands of students are scrambling to get back to Australia after a shock announcement from the Chinese government. It effectively ruled an end to online overseas study, saying all students must return to campuses.
Surprise, anger and confusion among the thousands of Chinese students after a sudden end to a pandemic provision. A unit within China's Education Ministry announced it is getting rid of a rule allowing people to take courses from overseas institutions online. It will no longer recognise diplomas and degrees attained that way, so students must head back to campuses to complete their studies.
I don't think they really have a choice when the Chinese government came out and said that they don't recognise online education. They're really put in a really tough position, and they just have to buy those flights, even though however much expensive it is.
It's estimated 40,000 Chinese students who hold a student visa were outside of Australia in November. That potentially means a lot of students entering the country in the next few weeks.
This creates challenges with getting on flights, getting visas, getting accommodation. But my department, the Department of Education, is meeting with the Department of Home Affairs this afternoon to make sure that we're putting in place all the measures that we can to assist with visa processing.
The influx will put more strain on already limited and costly student accommodation.
Because of all those beds in those student accommodations, purpose building are already filled up, it forces students to go to the private rental market, and we know it's really tough now. It's really, really expensive. And on top of that, we have really a lot of dodgy landlords as well, which exploit international students due to a lack of legal knowledge.
Chinese students vented their frustration on the social media app Weibo. One posted, "My visa has expired, so I won't be able to arrive before school starts, no matter what." The return of thousands of students is a potential economic boon. In 2019, before the pandemic, Chinese students contributed $12 billion to the Australian economy. Brent O'Halloran, Sky News in Taipei.
To look more now at the impact this decision will have on our university sector, let's go live to the Deputy Vice-Chancellor International at the University of Melbourne, Professor Michael Wesley. Michael Wesley, great to see you as always. How many students would be affected by this snap decision by the Chinese authorities?
Look, potentially, as the report said, Kieran, we're looking at tens of thousands across Australia. In particular, we're looking at students who are in their last year or their last semester of study. Many of these students would have done the rest of their degree online, and therefore are probably a little bit disappointed that they couldn't complete their degree online. A lot of them would be thinking about the unfairness of having to come all the way to Australia, pay the airfare and all of the accommodation costs to do one or two subjects to complete their degrees. And we're certainly hoping that there will be a little bit of flexibility on the part of the Chinese government to accommodate students like that, given that students have borne the brunt of these lockdowns and the pandemic. We just hope that they're given a little bit of slack.
Will the universities give the students some flexibility as well, given the speed with which this decision has been announced and imposed?
Look, I think so. It's hard for me to speak for the university sector as a whole, Kieran, but I think that most universities in Australia have been very, very sympathetic to the plight of students from overseas. They did it tough during the pandemic, and many of them have not had the opportunity to experience the on-the-ground, the campus experience during their degrees. So I think universities will be inclined to be supportive of their students. We are aware that, as Oscar said in the grab there, it will be quite difficult to get tickets now. It'll probably be quite expensive, and then the uncertainty of accommodation is laid on top of that.
It does seem an interesting development in the context of it's been a difficult few years in the bilateral relationship, but now maybe a further sign that the Chinese authorities are happy with this rapprochement to continue into higher education.
Yeah, I mean, the way I read the declaration is that it actually applies to all countries. And obviously Australia is a major educator of Chinese students, but so are countries like the UK, the US, Canada, and so on. But I think the fact that China has done this is an admission on the part of the Chinese government that a large number of Chinese students are still preferring to go to overseas universities to be educated. And I think really what this declaration says is that China believes that an on-campus, on-the-ground experience is a very good education, and we at the University of Melbourne would agree with that.
But further to their declaration, have you noticed a pickup in students? From what I can gather, obviously we're waiting for tariffs to be removed on billions of dollars of exports, but just the signal itself that the President met with our Prime Minister, that the Foreign Minister met with her counterpart in Beijing, that the signals are being sent that to those that want to come to Australia, feel free.
Yeah, and we're certainly seeing strong interest from Chinese students in the University of Melbourne. We're yet to see whether that will bounce back in the next few months to what you might call pre-COVID levels. But what we're seeing is very high numbers of inquiries about our degrees and very high numbers of applications to come and study at the University of Melbourne. That's entirely a good thing. And I understand from my counterparts at other universities here in Australia, they're seeing exactly the same thing. I think, there is an element of the thawing bilateral relationship that could explain that. But I think probably more likely is the fact that Australian universities have a strong reputation in China. Australia's universities have educated literally hundreds of thousands of young Chinese people, and those people have had a very good experience at Australian universities. And I think there are their sons and daughters and nephews and nieces that are seeking to have very similar opportunities and experiences in Australia.
Deputy Vice-Chancellor International at the University of Melbourne, Professor Michael Wesley, great to get your insights. Thank you.
Thanks, Kieran.